clearly, the NAFTA agreement, as I've said multiple times, and as most people agree, it needed to be updated. It needed a facelift. It was negotiated back in the late 80s and 90s, and it went into effect in 1994 before the internet even existed and e-commerce and things even existed. So there's no question that that the agreement needed to be updated, and I think most would fully support that. Now, the way that the administration has gone about it is a totally different matter, and we could probably spend all the time that we have this morning on that. I would say, I guess, based on Kyla's prior report, I'd sound a little bit more of a cautionary note. I definitely think that a lot of credit is due. It does seem that we're at a new point, perhaps a tipping point in the negotiations where an agreement might be at hand, an agreement in principle on the bilateral issues that relate to the U.S. and Mexico. But we are a long way still from a final agreement, a trilateral agreement that includes Canada. And even with respect to the Mexicans, there are some key issues like the so-called sunset provision that is an absolute non-starter for Mexico that hasn't even been addressed yet in these negotiations. So I think it's still a little early to break out the champagne.
So you saw the election, and then you saw the winner. And the outcome, when all of a sudden this relationship would seem much more positive than we expected between the new president and President Trump. Were you surprised by that, or were you gratified by it? Is it a good thing, or are both sides just trying to they're looking at what both sides need and saying this is good for both of us? What's happening here?
Well, I certainly think that President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO as he's known, has certainly struck a conciliatory tone with the U.S., and that can only be seen as a good thing. I think that largely reflects the fact that AMLO is going to be very focused on his domestic agenda and his domestic priorities, and he's got a lot of things that he wants to tackle in Mexico. Having this cantankerous relationship with the U.S. is certainly not helpful to that. But, you know, I wouldn't assume that this honeymoon period will continue forever. AMLO will insist that the United States treat Mexico with respect. And certainly if President Trump doesn't get what he thinks he wants or needs or deserves in these negotiations and resorts to his historical tactics with Mexico, things could go south pretty quickly. So the jury is a bit out still.
Do you think he's playing Canada against Mexico? And he's got, you know, now sort of it's a good cop, bad cop. Canada may feel left out, I guess. I don't know. If he were to lose Mexico, then it'd be, you know, he wouldn't have that advantage with Canada.
It's interesting because, you know, if you go back to the beginning of these negotiations, Canada was the good student, the teacher's pet, and Mexico was kind of vilified by Trump. Now, you've had this election, you've had this reopenness to negotiations, more flexibility toward Mexico shown by the United States, and now Canada, since the G7, has been backbenched. I think that's really a problematic, and that's one of the concerns I have about the way this agreement and this negotiation is playing out. We've certainly, and give credit where credit's due, I think the Mexicans have hung in there. They've shown a lot of resilience and a lot of maturity and flexibility in their negotiating style, and they've been able to bring Ambassador Lighthizer and his team along to a certain point. But sidelining the Canadians the way they've been sidelined, I think, is not productive. The president's comments in his cabinet meeting, again, sort of going out of his way to antagonize the Canadians, is not helpful. At the end of the day, this has to be a trilateral agreement. You know, you've got to bring three very distinct parties with very distinct domestic political constraints and needs to the table to get an agreement. Trump seems to forget that.